Good morning, everyone. I warmly welcome you to today's Liliana Talks program. With me in the studio, distinguished historian, political scientist, professor at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C., Professor Marek Jan Chodakiewicz.
Hello, thank you for watching us.
Thank you very much for accepting.
And thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for accepting the invitation. And Paweł Pawłowski, chairman of the board of the Warsaw Institute Foundation.
Hello everyone. I'm very honored to be here with you.
So let us start with the topic Intermarium. The concept seems to be experiencing a renaissance among the political elites right now. So, Professor, let's start from the outset. Why this initiative is so important?
Well,
or is it?
I can respond. Why isn't it important? It's convenient. It's historically compelling. After all, the first attempt to establish a bloc, an alliance, stems from the 15th and 16th centuries during the Jagiellonian period in Poland, but other nations of the Intermarium, that is the lands between the Baltic bloc and Adriatic seas, were actually game. They, for the most part, they were interested in it, in particular because in the south, the alternative was the Ottoman Empire, so Islam. And most reacted to the Islamic danger with fear, trepidation, and disgust. Hugh Seton Watson wrote that the attitude of the people of the Intermarium to the Ottoman Empire, to Islam, was one of absolute fear of this alien entity, and he compared the Ottoman Empire and Islam to the Soviet Union. So he said it's just like anti-communism in the Intermarium. He wrote in the 50s and 60s, he said that one should not be surprised if the reaction of the people of the Intermarium to communism would be as violent as it had been to the Ottoman Empire. So perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of convenience, perhaps because of a combination of several factors, it behooves the people of the Intermarium to try to work together. Right now we have a situation which has been rather permanent for a long time, where nearly everyone hates each other in the Intermarium. There are two exceptions, the Poles and the Hungarians. They love each other, even though geopolitically they have very little in common. In particular, when you look at the current policy of Budapest. But it was so back under the Habsburg Empire, the Hungarians were on a totally different page, but for cultural reasons, mostly widespread nobility and its freedoms, there was compatibility between the Poles and the Hungarians. Not geopolitical, but certainly cultural. In the Baltics, you can say there is affinity between Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, Estonia and Latvia. So there is hope. Currently, in Western Balkans, you can talk about some kind of perhaps collusion of interests between Croatia and Slavonia. Otherwise, most nations of the Intermarium tend to have a poor opinion of its neighbors and sometimes even covet the lands that that the neighbors occupy. So the situation needs to be healed in situ, here, in place, before we can progress. I have just returned from Hungary, and I was told fairly close to the top that right now they said, it's a good idea. Intermarium is. Especially when Trump brought it up. But right now he says the Poles seem interested, but the Czechs don't give a damn. The Slovaks completely blow it off. So what kind of an intermarium are we going to have? I think they have indicated to me that this is unrealistic at this moment. Well, all huge projects need dreams, but they also need to be grounded in reality. There is a problem with Poland, because Poland is a former dominating power, a hegemon. The old Rzeczpospolita straddled much of the Intermarium. And it goes without saying that the Lithuanians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians view almost any Polish initiative or Polish-driven initiatives as revival of Polish imperialism. Never mind that the most imperialist forces were native Ukrainians or Belarusians or White Russians and Ruthenians in general, as well as Samogitians, Lithuanians. It doesn't matter to them. They project the past onto the future and suspect some kind of integral Polish nationalist project. Whereas it's in the interest of everyone in the region to unite, to work together even before turning to Brussels. There should be exchange, integration, etc. We started talking about the Intermarium over 20 years ago, some 22 years ago in Washington, D.C. And it was very difficult going with the State Department. But in general, there is a tendency in the United States to wish to deal with a single entity as opposed to a bunch of states. Like, where the heck is Albania out here? What's Moldova? They would tell me. So I patiently explained what the Intermarium was, and the powers that be increasingly began to think that this could fly because it's more convenient to talk to one. By which I mean some kind of a representation. We have the cooperative agreement, Visegrad, with the Hungarians and others, but what about everybody else? And this was the idea behind us resurrecting in DC the Intermarium. Also, as a bloc, it's easier to defend. It's easier to deal with. Because the State Department was not interested initially, we talked to the Pentagon, which is much more pragmatic and much more realistic. There is not as much kumbaya, there is not as much wishful thinking and utopian social engineering projects, at least until recently. And I have to tell you that even, let's just say, not hardcore conservatives, but let's say mainstream players such as Ian Brzezinski or Ambassador Fried admitted openly that under the Obama administration, nobody wanted to talk about the Intermarium. Everybody at the State Department, everybody would just shy away. There was no traction. But when Trump came, he thought, for whatever reason, it's very difficult to guess how he thinks, he thought it was a good idea. I think as a pragmatic businessman, one entity as opposed to many competing states and cultures. And it continued under Biden. Generally speaking, every president inherits foreign policy of his predecessor. So you have to run with it. And I'm not saying that the State Department is ultra excited, but it hasn't ditched the Intermarium as a concept. There are still things going on, which is a good sign. Why do I mention the United States? It's simple. At this junction in history, Poland can't defend itself. So until Poland has, number one, an elite which is strategically minded, not just brown-nosing Brussels or brown-nosing Washington, D.C., until there is a new elite, young elite, that is not afraid to acquire and use nuclear weapons, Poland is not safe. I'm not saying America is a fair-weather friend. I think it's an exotic ally. I, myself, as both an American and a person of Polish extraction, care about Poland, but until there is some kind of a lobby that can guarantee similar outcomes like the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C., you can't count on America. And with the Israeli lobby, as you see, there is impermanence. In fact, what you observe in Israel presently is, I am guessing, and it's an educated guess, is an attempt by the Biden administration to overthrow Bibi Netanyahu. It's a color revolution, what you're witnessing. There are American foundations, and definitely there is sympathy from the State Department in maybe even more. I am not privy to any details, but I asked around before coming out to Europe, and oh yeah, they don't like Bibi, which is an indication that Poland should be friendly with Bibi. But that's another story. For now, when we focus on the Intermarium, realistically speaking, the only people who have the means to defend this place and help out with this place are the Americans. An exotic ally, an ally, remember Roosevelt, but also remember President Wilson, who was friendly to Poland. Roosevelt was hostile. Both were Democrats. So Poland will have to figure out what to do. And it's up to Poland, really, to prepare itself, not to put all the eggs in one basket, which is the United States.
Thank you very much, Professor. And you mentioned that the countries has several, let's say, problems with each other. And you mentioned that we should somehow heal this bad energy that is still around. But how? How can we do it?
Time heals everything.
All right. But how much time do we need?
How much time? 100 years at least, before everybody relaxes about one's identity. I mean, it's ridiculous that until recently the Poles were not allowed to use their own names in Lithuania. I hear the Lithuanians want to change Polish name places. Well, if we're talking about the old Commonwealth, Rzeczpospolita, that we're talking about Lwów, Lviv, Lemberg, Leopolis, Lvov. You better get used to it. It's not phony multiculturalism imposed by Brussels. It's a real living thing. You have Armenians, you have Jews, you have Tatars, you have everybody. You know, of course, Lithuanians, Ruthenians, or in this case, at this stage, Ukrainians, better get used to it. But that's a change in mentality. The greatest problem, in a way, is not nationalism, because nationalism gives you identity. The greatest problem is folk nationalism, and folk nationalism obtains in places like Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, not in Hungary. In Hungary, their nationalism was universalist because, for instance, Croatian nobility could easily become Hungarian, just like Ruthenian nobility, people with last names like mine, could become Polish. That meant the West. But of course, it's anathema to folk nationalists. Who are they? They are usually descendants of peasants. Their mentality is constrained by their historical experiences. That is number one, its social background, and number two, the egalitarian siren call of Sovietism and communism. So they are extremely confused. To assert themselves, they are so insecure that, for instance, in Lithuania, they won't let the Poles be. But in Ukraine, the Polish minority is not cherished in any way. It's only here in Poland where you see the government and the dominant liberal elites worshipping minorities, which is, I guess, more an act of faith than a human reflex of, oh, okay, so that's who you are, that's how you look, that's what it is.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
So changes in mentality are extremely
Many questions if we
extremely
have
difficult.
100 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. So it's best to concentrate on fixing each place separately. So fix Poland. Fix Poland. That means assess the situation. Do not accept blindly, like you did after '89. Oh, we'll just embrace liberalism. When liberalism was spinning out of control into a direction where a Supreme Court justice in the United States told us publicly she didn't know how to define a woman. And they made her Supreme Court justice. So she doesn't know who she is, and she's going to pass judgment. And of course, her judgment is pretty silly. She's shown in the past few months that she's just...
we will go back to this topic because it's also quite interesting. But let's stick to Intermarium for just a second. And Pavel, my question to you would be, should we extend it to some other countries, like Greece, for example?
I think you mean the 3Cs initiative.
Yes, 3Cs initiative, yes, sorry.
Because 3Cs initiative is currently concentrating on infrastructure.
Yes.
I mean here, digital infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and energy infrastructure. I think it's quite logical to accept Greece if they are interested, and clearly they are. It is logical if we mean this infrastructure, but we can already see that 3Cs initiative can't concentrate only on infrastructure. It is we don't have so big funds. We have this 3Cs initiative fund, but it's if we compare these 1 billion euros to the needs of the 3Cs initiative, we can see that it is not something that can bring some pace to that initiative.
Plus not all the countries
to see
joined
this to see this horizon that it's attractive for other countries and for the nations of 3Cs initiative to see this as something what is interesting and it's attractive for them. So I think we should add them. Also, it's interesting that we have this new form of participating in 3Cs initiative. We have Ukraine and I think we will have Moldova this year as a participating partner of the Free Seas Initiative. And if we mean infrastructure, obviously, Ukraine here is very important. If we want to connect, for example, Black Sea ports with Baltic Sea ports, Ukraine is absolutely crucial, and it's good for the initiative. But I don't believe that we should limit this initiative solely to infrastructure. That's not enough, and we can already see that it's not that the politicians of the region are not interested in the initiative to the level they should be if we want to make it something real and something that can create a real policy in Europe. We should have some other forms. So this is a good question, how to form it in a way that will really affect the policy in Europe.
If I may, first, if we were to strategize, you're the boss, and we advise you, you always ask yourself, first, what is the most important? Out of so many things you could do, however, you have the means to do something, but not everything. So, what's the most important? The most important is spirit, which drives everything. If you have a bunch of cynics with $1 billion, they'll just buy heroin and shoot it up, or sell heroin to children to make more money, okay? But, so you have to keep in mind that when we strategize, it's also our spirit that drives us, not cold calculation, because we're neither animals nor robots, we're human beings. So the spirit is very important. But if you look at the nuts and bolts, I think the most significant aspect of this Intermarium project is energy security. Yeah. No energy, no development. It's as simple as that. And Orban said himself, well, I wouldn't be doing any of that stuff if I had energy. So one of the first things that went along with our talking to the Pentagon and inviting people and staging conferences and pushing this Intermarium project, which eventually came out as my book on the Intermarium in 2011. First thing was to conceptualize how to provide energy security. And naturally, nuclear energy is the safest.
Yes. And
it's the best for the region. Before you have nuclear energy aplenty, before you have the plants up, etc., despite the resistance from the West, from crazy Greens, you have to think about a backup plan. And our backup plan was Intermarium, Sofia or Bulgaria, Croatia, and Poland around Świnoujście to create energy hubs. And they are in the making. I know that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, including one of my students who was a high-ranking officer, came here to help the Poles with infrastructural projects regarding LNG, because the Poles didn't have the know-how. Why was I pushing for an alternative? I am very much pro-nuclear energy. I've been writing about it forever. But there also has to be some kind of a backup plan. And in my thinking, the best idea would be to get what America has plenty of. We have so much shale gas that sometimes we burn 70% of it because we have nowhere to transport it, or nothing to do with it. So this access, American energy, should be coming to the Intermarium, Poland, Croatia, and Bulgaria, to supply the region, and also to supply Western Europe. There is plenty of it. There would be no energy dependency on Russia, but also no energy dependency on the Gulf, on the Saudis. Why is that good? It's because America likes business. Everybody likes to make money, but it's best to supply one's own allies rather than allow countries which are, if not hostile, then incompatible with us, like Saudi and Russia.
And what about Azerbaijan now?
It has to go through Turkey.
Yes, and then Hungary.
Oh, Hungary, I don't think would have a problem to sell. Remember, Viktor Orban channels Count Tisza. Count Tisza was Prime Minister of Hungary, the Kingdom of Hungary, before World War I and during World War I. He loved the Poles personally, but he was against Poland's independence because it was not in the interest of the Kingdom of Hungary to have another part that would compete with the Kingdom of Hungary. So he had nothing against the Poles. It's just he didn't want Poland to be free.
Fair enough, you know.
Yes, fair enough. But if you are getting offended about that, let me tell you about his attitude towards Austria. The Prime Minister of Austria, not of the imperial government, but of Austria, turned to him and said, listen, Austria is starving. This was 1917 or so. And Count Tisza said, really? Too bad. I need to feed the Hungarians. Did he have enough for Hungary? Yeah. And he didn't want to share. So this is Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban behaves like Bismarck would. But he's not German.
Yeah.
What he wants is to overturn Trianon, the Treaty of Trianon, that truncated and punished Hungary, singularly punished by leaving millions of Hungarians in areas abutting Hungary. Imagine if along the Bug River, the eastern border of Poland, there were millions of Poles in the counties adjacent to the border. And that's what Trianon did to Hungary, and no true Hungarian patriot will ever rest until that is remedied. Of course, there are various ways of going about it, and at the moment it doesn't look like anybody will be
When we
revived.
think about the cooperation in the Three Seas, it does not sound good. I mean, Hungarian plans are not aligned with any cooperation in the
don't take me
region.
wrong. I love the Hungarians for cultural reasons, for historical reasons, but there is very little commonality of interest. And each time in the 20th century they chose a specific way, it was always to the detriment of Poland and eventually to the detriment of Hungary, which also lost its independence. It's a tough proposition when you, for historical reasons, you like a people and you feel comfortable when you go to Budapest, but they are on a different page.
Yeah.
And until there is some kind of a realignment, they will go with the flow. Don't take me wrong. So if you set up an Intermarium that will guarantee the reversal of the countercultural revolution that has conquered the West, they'll join the project as a measure of security for their own reasons. Mm-hmm. But they have to have a compelling reason. And number one, it's energy.
Yeah.
And number two is culture.
I believe we're still staying in the same topic, but the war in Ukraine lasted more than 500 days. And my question would be, who has the best policy towards the war? I don't know if I know the
From
answer.
what point of view?
National interests.
The Chinese.
All right. And in the case of Europe. Europe.
Well, you have to be specific.
Sorry.
In the case of the West.
Yes.
Okay.
No, in
Chinese,
general.
I mean, that sounds very interesting. Why Chinese?
The Chinese pretend to care about peace, and they try to primarily take care of their own interests, and they deal with the Russians behind everyone's back, so we don't really know what they negotiate. But I'll tell you a couple of points which I don't know how solid they are, because everything is in a state of flux. And some information, because of the war, some information is not reliable. So, number one, who is rumored to be the largest landowner in Ukraine?
The US is rumored.
No, China.
China?
Yep, not the US. Landowner. So the first deal to let the ships through was to let the Chinese grain out.
No.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know.
This is what I'm talking about. How solid is my intel? Well, I trust my sources, but
Yes.
have I been to the archives? Have I looked at the deeds? No.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not the United States. The United States has other interests, but not the land. Now, you know the Chinese try to buy land everywhere to produce food for themselves. For example, some years back they corrupted deputies in the Filipino parliament to buy, I think, 3 million hectares or 3 million acres to plant rice. Until Filipino nationalists found out about it, and it was Anyway, the Chinese tried to do the same thing in Latin America. Of course, you know what's going on in Africa.
Yeah.
It's an outright colonization, but colonization without setting up any infrastructure but the infrastructure to suck things out of those countries. Suck things up. So the model they have in Ukraine is replicated everywhere else. Through analogy and through some intel, I stick to my guns until I'm proven wrong.
All right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes, but I have.
And China, at the same time, pretends to play the Vatican.
Oh,
and
yes.
Talk about
Yes,
peace.
yes, exactly.
Talk about love, etc. Of course, they don't care. They have been supplying places like Egypt, like Yemen, and this is in the interest of Saudi Arabia. Please note China's move on a global scale that resulted in rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians.
Yeah.
That's a part of that deal. The Saudis pay for the grain. If they don't pay for the grain, there's going to be a revolution in Egypt. And who knows what's going to happen? So this is so what I'm suggesting to you, you must set up a think tank that wouldn't be navel gazing in Poland. You have to understand how the big girls and big boys play. Because you guys think, oh, Hungary, or maybe Germany.
No, I wouldn't say so. We love Hungary.
Okay. No, what I'm saying is, instead of focusing on yourselves,
Yeah.
you should understand your place and think globally. That's all I'm saying.
So I have one additional question.
And then going back to your question, because you were not interested in China. And
No, I am, but
but I wanted to.
I wanted to get different answer, you know.
I'm sorry. That's all I'm capable of generating at the moment. But even if Poland is the most important to you and others, you always must think, Count Tisa, how come this guy in Hungary is doing what he's doing? And then try to channel the Chinese or channel the Russians. This is not an excuse for Russia. It's not what in the West passes as an argument, oh, we, the United States, by expanding NATO, lying to the Russians, promoted and fostered this situation, and we caused the war, it's our fault. There are people in the United States, very serious scholars, who claim that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, think like the Russians so you would know where they're coming from. And they, for the most part, are paranoid. When they look outside the Kremlin, they think they're surrounded. Never mind, it's still the largest country on earth. For goodness sake, what, 9 time zones? Used to be 14, but who's counting? So, and they think they're surrounded. So everybody is a threat. Everything is a threat. Any attempts at claiming sovereignty, like in Ukraine, is a threat. Keep that in mind. So when you are not as strong as the Russians, perhaps you should do what you need to do for your country, but keep your mouth shut. As opposed to advertise. I am here to whip your butt. I'm sorry. With whom? Well, I don't know, but I am a fly riding on the tiger's nose. Maybe I'll sting the tiger. Now this is silly. So it's not an apology for Russia or China to know how they think and what makes them tick. Same, it's not really a criticism of the United States that we are the stupid empire. We're not the evil empire. We're just stupid. Who got the oil after the war in Iraq? Remember Europeans moaning, oh, no blood for oil, the Americans are in Iraq to take the oil, blah, blah, blah. This is silly.
Yeah.
Do you know who got the oil from the Iraqis?
I don't know.
China. China, of course. And it goes on and on and on. So there should be a place here in Warsaw that does this stuff.
Can I have now the additional question?
It's your show. I'm just stealing it.
No, we are here actually to talk to you and learn from you. And my additional question is, regarding to what you said about Ukraine and China there, what do you think about those current ideas of inviting Ukraine to the European Union? I mean, is it safe in this case? When we think about China,
you can invite
possession.
You can invite. Ukraine to the European Union. That's not that big of a deal. That means they would have to conform with the Istanbul Convention, which they have signed, and with all the crazy countercultural attitudes and accoutrements, and they are ready. The elite is ready to do it. The people don't even know what's coming. This wouldn't be a big deal. Would that give China a foothold? You bet, but China already has a foothold. There is a shopping center outside of Warsaw, which is putatively Vietnamese, but I hear China controls it. There is a big hub, Chinese hub, in Hungary, huge. There's also one in Slovakia. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't worry so much about Chinese influences in Ukraine as an impediment to Ukraine's joining. But if Ukraine joins, then Polish, Hungarian, and Romanian farmers and Slovak farmers will be really up the creek without a paddle. It'll be very difficult for them. I know that Ukrainian agricultural products are not up to par meaning they are not compatible with the bureaucrats in Brussels have dreamt of. But still, it is going to be a huge challenge. So whether or not it's in Poland's interest or in interest of the Intermarium for Ukraine to join the European Union, perhaps we have the Intermarium, so there could be a separate block or at least halfway house before you join the EU. And of course, when I say join the EU, then you have to ask yourselves a question. What did Poland join? Did Poland know it was joining? Because I don't think so. And I'll tell you what my argument was 20 years ago. There are two forms of joining. One is mergers, the other one is acquisitions. When your company is screwed up, it needs reform, and it's not viable economically, there is an acquisition. So a stronger company, firm, acquires you. Then you, as the president, and me, and him, the board of directors, we get golden parachutes. And we're happy. The crew, people who work for you, get the boot. And that's what happened in Poland. And there is a merger. When your company is small, but it's functioning well, and it brings profit, then there is a merger, and there is equality. So even the workers succeed. Now, Poland's slowly waking up to this reality, but that should have been the case when the donkey choir on the Vistula yelled, let's join the EU and not ask any questions.
Yes. And now my question to Pavel, because we already talked about China, but if we're talking about the best policy in the EU towards the war, would it be Hungary?
That's the very provocative question.
Yes.
That's why I didn't answer it.
But you know, you were mentioning Hungary all the time, and like I could understand that we should firstly think about our own interests.
Yes.
And then think about others. And that's what I understood from your speech.
Yes. Without the measure of provocation that Viktor Orban loves to spill. He's not an agent of Russia. He wants Putin to be his agent. That's how arrogant the Hungarian policy. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
So you really want me to answer this question? I want to answer this question.
All right. Okay, so now let's move.
I mean, if you're asking me if the Hungarian government is more flexible and more politic and more realistic than other governments in the Intermarium, look, the Croatians emulate the Hungarians. They are not a frontline state, but they emulate the Hungarians.
And there's also this saying, you know, if you can't beat them, you should join them. Yes. But all right, let's leave the topic.
But I'm also interested. You said that China is the great power that benefits from the war in Ukraine, and how is
to an extent?
How is the United States? Because
so in Hungary they said the U.S. is bankrupt because you guys have supported Ukraine. I said, no, that's peanuts. We've